Hello, everybody. Welcome to the History Valley podcast. Today, Dr. Ryan M. Armstrong joins us. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. So, from what I gather, you recently got your PhD from a dissertation on the Book of Job.
Yes, that's right. Yep, from Princeton Theological Seminary.
Awesome! Congratulations. Could you tell us? Could you tell the audience what is the dissertation defending regarding Job? What is it talking about?
Yes, great question. Thank you. Like most PhD students or former PhD students, I love talking about my dissertation. So let me know if I ramble on too much or whatever, and feel free to ask any questions. But
Sure.
basically, scholars for a long time, not just scholars, but interpreters, people that read the Book of Job, they've asked a lot of questions throughout history about mediation in the Book of Job. The thing is, Job often, let's make sure you can hear me okay. Job often talks about how he wants a mediator when he's confronting God, especially in chapters 9 and chapter 15, and then again in chapter 19. There's the famous passage, "I know my Redeemer lives." At the end, he'll rise above the dust, depending on how you translate it. So there's a lot of big mediator passages that have really been popular to talk about for interpreters. And so my book is looking at the Book of Job, looking at these mediation passages in the Book of Job, but I'm not focused as much on Job's mediator passages, the passages in Job's speeches where he looks for a mediator. But I was kind of looking at the roles of the other characters in the book and how they kind of fit in with this theme of mediation. So essentially, I'm defending the idea that in the Book of Job, the theme of mediation is used as a way of talking about a level of honesty between humans and God. That's kind of a way of getting at honesty and relationship with God is by introducing mediation, the concept of mediation.
Hmm. When would you date the Book of Job?
The Book of Job. This is a big question. It seems like for a lot of people. Most scholars put it in the Persian period nowadays, and I think there's a solid argument to be made that it's probably in the Persian period, which is, after the Babylonian exile, when the Persian Empire took over, probably, um, probably 6th century BCE, around there. Maybe just maybe still under exile, or maybe just after they come back, the Israelites come back from exile. But right in there, it seems like there are some place names. There are some references to monuments and things that only occur during the Persian period. And even though the whole book is written to sound super ancient, the whole thing is kind of written in this funny dialect of Hebrew, and it kind of, the setting takes place in a land far, far away, in a galaxy long ago. So there's kind of this whole setting of it that makes it sound really ancient, and even the opening of it, it sounds like one of these stories about Abraham or Isaac or Jacob or some of these Genesis stories. But there's a lot of clues in the book that kind of let us know that it was written a lot later, but it was trying to kind of conjure up some of these more ancient stories.
Could it have been at all partially or heavily inspired by the Babylonian story, the Ludlel Bel Nemeky, the poem of the righteous sufferer?
Oh, you know your stuff, Jay.
Hmm.
Yeah, man. So that's the Babylonian, the Odyssey, Babylonian Sufferer. A lot of people compare that to the Book of Job, and there are a few other Babylonian texts. There are a few other ancient sufferer texts as well. I Those ideas were definitely floating around in the air, and the author of Job uh, might have known about them and might have been inspired by them. it doesn't seem like there are any direct references to Lulu Belnemeki or some of these other ancient sufferer texts in the Book of Job. Some scholars might disagree with me. I kind of follow my former professor, Ed
Sure.
Greenstein at Babylonian University, and he says that that the Book of Job doesn't really directly reference a lot of ancient sufferer texts, although there are direct references to Enuma Elish and a few other Akkadian texts. And there's a lot of Akkadian influence, and don't necessarily want to say Akkadian influence, but there's a lot of ideas swirling around from ancient Mesopotamia and from ancient Sumerian and from like it just seems like the authors of the Book of Job, author or authors, were very well read, and they knew so much about ancient legends and the ancient Near East and about languages even. And so there is some, you could argue for influence for sure and some inspiration maybe, but it doesn't seem like it directly references some of these texts.
Do you think Job could have originally have been a historical figure, and he was just heavily exaggerated, played with by whoever actually wrote Job, and they could have just, and this is kind of in some way rephrasing an earlier, restating an earlier question, that they could have been just rehashing Job using other ancient suffering poems.
I see what you mean. So you mean, so the question is, you're asking if Job was a historical person, and then somebody later kind of wrote about Job and trying to kind of incorporate some of these other ancient Near Eastern
Yes.
suffering texts? That's
Yes.
a really good question, actually. So I do think that, sorry, let me say what I don't think first.
Okay.
So I don't think that the book is really trying to teach history, maybe the same way that a newspaper would, or the same way that we would think of today, like a historical account. Maybe not even in the same way that the Gospels are, for example, where the Gospels are kind of, telling a story not too long after a certain time period or something like that, and they're trying to get king names right and things like that. The Book of Job is written really late, but it's trying to kind of talk about an ancient legend, something long ago. So it would be kind of like today if I wrote a story about Robin Hood, maybe. So Robin Hood, I think there are debates in Robin Hood scholarship about whether or not that was an actual person, whether or not Robin Hood ever existed, or if it was based on a real person or not. So nobody really knows the historical Robin Hood very much. But, we have tons of stories about Robin Hood. Everybody kind of has these fun legends and these fun stories that they make up about Robin Hood. And that's kind of how the Book of Job is. In Ezekiel, there's a story, it talks about the legend of Job and Noah and Daniel. Like these three people, they're so super righteous. And let's see if I can find the exact reference right here. Yeah, these three people are so super righteous that, here it is. It is in Ezekiel 14. Yeah, sorry. So Ezekiel 14, like these three people are so righteous that God's going to destroy, God's going to come and destroy Jerusalem. But even if these three people that are so super righteous were living in Jerusalem, they're still not even righteous enough to save Jerusalem. In fact, they're not even righteous enough to save their own children. And now we don't know, well, for a long time, we didn't know who this Daniel was. We assumed it was Daniel, the book of Daniel. But why is Ezekiel referencing Daniel? And it just kind of made no sense, and Daniel's kids and all this stuff. But then in the 1920s, we discovered Ugaritic from Ras Shamra, and we found some more ancient legends that we had never really known before. And one of them is a legend about Daniel. And he's the super righteous guy that is so righteous, and he goes on a quest. His son dies. He goes on a quest to try to save his son. and dealing with the gods and all of this stuff. So it seems like another legend to save his children. Noah is a legend about saving his children and about future generations. And so it seems like from Ezekiel's probably referencing Job as a similar legend about a super righteous person, and then something with his children in danger. And so when we come to the book of Job, probably written after Ezekiel, we see that they're probably referencing the same legend. They're probably not referencing Ezekiel. They're probably referencing the same legendary figure of Job that Ezekiel is. And so when you read Job, if you're a Persian era reader, you know about this ancient legend about Job. When you first start off, you see Job making sacrifices to try to protect his kids. And if you know the legend, you're biting your nails. You're like, oh no, here it comes. The kids are in danger. Here we go. And so you already kind of are worried about it a little bit. So I think to go back to your answer, yes, for sure. The book of Job is really trying to bring in legends that people already know, really trying to reference these legends that people already know, specifically a legend about this ancient righteous man named Job. And it could be that some of the ancient sufferer texts are referencing a similar person, or maybe the same person, or maybe there are other ways of kind of getting at this same idea about a righteous person who suffers. That's the book of Job definitely does not have a monopoly on righteous sufferers, but it does seem like the book is really trying to pull out some legends that maybe the reader, a really smart reader, would already know.
Mm. Now, as you brought up this Daniel character in the Canaanite Ugaritic text, so I remember looking into him a while about Daniel of Akkad. Do you think that the book of Daniel used that as a source at all?
Wow. I don't know of any connections
Mm.
between Daniel and the book of Daniel. It would be actually it would be really interesting to see if there were any kind of
Yeah,
intentional connections there.
I've always wondered if there could be.
Even just like a wordplay or something like that. It seems like
Yeah.
if I were writing the book of Daniel, I would like to throw in something kind of fun like that. But that's a
Mm.
good question, especially because Daniel is so international. It's written partly in Aramaic and Hebrew. There's a swirl of languages and cultures there. But short answer is I don't know if I've never heard anybody mention any direct connection between Daniel and Daniel.
Mm. Do you think in the Job in a way is a parable for Israel suffering as a nation under a captivity?
Wow, this is a great question. Um, I think that there is a very good possibility that that's true, actually.
Mm.
And part of that lies in the ending of the book. At the very end of the book, God comes to the three friends and says, "Look, you guys didn't speak right about me, but Job did, and so Job has to pray for you guys." And then the next line, Job gets blessed, but the word for blessing for Job, I think most English translations say God restored the captivity, or restored the fortunes of Job, is what most English translations say. And literally, it means restored captivity of. It's like a fixed phrase, a very technical phrase in Hebrew. Shuvah shvit is the phrase in Hebrew. And this
Mm.
phrase is only used of nations outside of the book of Job. This is the only place in all of, maybe not the history of Hebrew language, but all of the Hebrew Bible, that is used of an individual, of a person. And it says Job is literally, captivity is restored for Job, shuv shvit of Job. And so it seems like the use of this phrase is very intentional, and whether or not it's trying to say that the whole book is a because the book doesn't exactly parallel the story of the exile. It's not. There are big differences. I'll come back to that in a second. But I want to talk a little bit more about this phrase, if I could, shuvah shvit, because it's used all over the prophets of exile, and not just Israel's exile, although it is specifically used of Israel's exile the most. It's also used of other nations. When God punishes a nation and then brings the nation back, like restore from captivity or restore the fortunes of that person. And captivity is maybe a little bit too much of a literal translation. It's not always captivity per se, but probably etymologically it comes from the term captivity, shuv shvit. They're very similar words. Shuv is return, and shvit is captivity, to take captive. So this word seems to be really trying to make the reader think about exile. I mean, this word is all over the prophets about how, you're going to go into captivity, and then if you're righteous and you pray and you repent, then God's going to restore you from captivity. And there's all these promises in the prophets about this. And so at the end of Job, God restores the captivity. God restores the fortunes of Job in the same way that God does a nation that's been punished. And one thing that's really interesting about this is that Job is not being punished. Like, you read the beginning, and Job is so righteous, and there's this whole bet with Satan. Like, there's no punishment at all with Job. Job thinks he is being punished, but he's not. And so God is, there's a big test, however you want to look at it. Even just the fact that Job is, in some ways, Job is punished for being too righteous. That Job is so righteous, he got God's attention. But at the end, God restores Job from punishment, almost essentially is what that term means. And it could be just kind of a little joke, to the reader, yeah, look, no matter how righteous you are, you're going to suffer sometimes, and it's going to feel like punishment. And with Job, he wasn't really being punished at all, but it really feels like he's kind of being restored from this punishment. But it could also be kind of more of an intentional parallel with the nation of Israel. And I don't want to read into it too much. I haven't found a lot of parallels between Job's story and the exile, but it does seem like the exile raised a lot of questions for the nation of Israel. And the book of Job is written at a time when these questions are really trying to be answered by Israel, by the nation. And so as the author is writing this book and dealing with suffering, and the author is either in exile or coming out of exile, and really thinking through, like, why have we been suffering so much? And a lot of the books of the Bible are saying it's because we sinned, and maybe we deserve this exile. And the book of Job really looks at suffering from a completely different perspective, that sometimes suffering happens and it's not punishment. And so as Job is recovering from his shvit, his suffering, he thinks it's punishment the whole time. And at the end, it's not punishment, but the same term is used that all the prophets use of restoration from punishment. So it could be that the author is trying to hint at something a little deeper theologically too. Again, I don't want to read into it too much, but it's really fun to speculate about. And that term is really, it's definitely there to get our attention, in my opinion.
When do you think that the actual Job, the historical Job, lived? So I know, because I know that the exact chronology is debated. It's not straightforward.
You're right. Yeah. I think, first of all, I don't want to say 100% that there was a historical Job, but there were ancient legends, and I think the legends probably put him around, I would guess, just Dan-el is so ancient. Dan-el is 1,000 years before the reign of Solomon, was when the text was at least was as early as the text was written about Dan-el. And Noah is supposed to be a long time before the reign of Solomon as well. So I would say that Job is probably supposed to have taken place around the time of maybe Noah, Abraham, like those early days of Genesis, probably. Yeah.
What do you think the major point was in writing Job?
Woo! That's a big one. I think there. So there are a bunch of different millions of interpretations about this. Like, why is Job written? And so many of them contradict each other, which makes this book so fun. The book is really asking so many questions about God and about righteousness and about suffering that it gets everyone's attention. And whether you're religious or not, you really want to know how do we deal with these questions, like justice. What is justice and what is fair and what is right? So many people have been asking questions about the book of Job. And there's so many different ways to read it. And I'm going to say up front that I think a big theme that is often neglected is honesty. That at the beginning of the book, Job is super, super righteous. So righteous that it's hard to even identify with him. It's hard to relate to him some ways because he's just obsessively making sacrifices for his children. He's, he's super duper righteous. Everything. The first thing we learn about him is that he's Ishtam v'yashar. He's a man who is blameless and upright. That he's so righteous. And so the first question is, why is he righteous? Why is he doing all this stuff? Is it because he honestly believes that it's right? Is it because he has an honest relationship with God? Or is he trying to get something for it? And so the Satan comes to God and the Satan says, why is this, is this guy just righteous because he's so blessed? He gets all this stuff. But if you take away that stuff, you'll find out how he really feels. And so, of course, that's how the book opens up and Job loses everything. Absolutely everything. He's righteous, but he's also rich, and then he loses all of his riches. And so the question is he going to curse God? The Satan says he's going to curse you once you take away all of that stuff. And is he going to curse God is the big question at the beginning. And then, at first, Job is even righteous in his response. Job says, naked I came into this world, and naked I shall return. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. And then when Job's wife says you should just curse God and die, he says, whoa, whoa, whoa. Are we going to accept good from God and not accept evil from God? And so Job is asking all these, Job is acting super righteous, even right after the suffering. And then all of a sudden chapter 3 hits. And just that first speech of Job, he just says, man, I wish I was never born. Like, this life is miserable. Everything sucks. And then Eliphaz, the 3 friends, they feel really uncomfortable at that point. Come on, Job, let's, they start trying to tell Job, let's flatter God a little bit. Let's just say that, God could never be unjust. Everything God does is righteous. And Job says explicitly that God is not just, that God made a mistake in this part. And I'm righteous and I shouldn't be punished like this. And God is wrong. And so that's where in chapter 9, he says, I need a judge. I need a mediator who is a judge that can say, God, you're wrong, and Job, you're right. And so there's the beginning opens up with this question about Job's motives. Is Job honestly serving God? Or is Job, just kind of kissing up to God to get favors? And then the friends, they clearly want Job to kiss up to God to get favors. And that's a huge theme in the speeches. And so in chapter 13, this is one of the chapters of my dissertation is about this. Chapter 13, Job actually cites Leviticus 19 in accusing the friends. In Leviticus 19, there's rules for mediators. And it says, look, if you're called on to be a judge in a court case, you've got to be fair and you've got to be honest and straightforward. And so if you're called on, you can't just take the side of the rich and the powerful. You have to play both sides evenly, and you have to be really honest about what's going on. And so Job, he cites this against his friends in chapter 13, and he says, you're just taking God's side, the side of the rich and powerful. Now God is powerful and God has all the cards. You're just taking God's side instead of mine. But I'm the one that's right here. justice would make you listen to me and be honest. And then he also in chapter 6, he talks chapter 6:25 and following, he tells his friends, he says, you're just trying to get me to kiss up to God, and you're flattering, you're lying, and you're just saying all this dishonest speech just to get on God's good side. And so the same accusation, almost the same accusation that the Satan makes against Job at the beginning, Job says that his friends are falling into this now. They're just flattering God, and they're lying. They're deceitful about God, just kind of kissing up to God. So this theme keeps going. At the beginning, we have Job. Is he righteous because is he honestly righteous, or is he just kind of flattering God? And then in the speeches, there's this debate about whether or not Job should just, say, well, God's always right, even if he doesn't believe it, even if he doesn't feel it, even if he thinks that God is unjust. And then at the very end of the book, one of the last things that God says is that to the friends, God says, you're going to have to, I'm about to punish you guys unless you get Job to pray for you. And the reason is because you did not speak nachonah the way that Job did. And there's a lot of debate about what this word nachonah means in Hebrew. So nachon is something that is firm and trustworthy, nachon. But the term nachonah, kind of like a feminine version of it, it's only used one other time in the whole Bible, in Psalm 8, I believe. And Psalm 8 is about, sorry, I probably should have pulled this up earlier, but Psalm 8 is about lying tongues. And Psalm 8. Psalm 15. It's about lying tongues, and it's about flattery and deception. And so it says that somebody speaks nachonah is not a lying tongue, is not flattery. Let me see if I can get the exact quote here, because it's pretty. What is it? Psalm. Well, anyway, sorry, I lost the. I want to get the.
I'll take your time.
Psalm 5:10. Yeah, Psalm 5:10 describes the here we go. Okay. In Psalm 5:10, the psalmist describes his enemies as flatterers who have no nachonah and no honesty in their mouths. And so most English translations, when God says to the friends, you didn't speak nachonah about me, most English translations will say you didn't speak right about me, or you didn't speak truth about me, like my servant Job did. But when you read Job's speeches, not everything Job says is right or factual. I mean, he accuses God of injustice, and he says that he's being punished when clearly he's not. God even thinks that he's righteous. He's the most righteous person on the planet, and God isn't trying to punish him for any sin. And Job is like, what did I do this? What kind of sin did I do that was so bad? So whatever it is, Job didn't speak everything factually right, but Job did speak honestly the whole time. Someone that is going to accuse God of injustice is not a kind of person who's going to try to flatter God who's not making all these sacrifices just to get favors. He's really honest. And so he passes that test in a sense that almost kind of goes against the way that the Satan thinks about it. The Satan says, well, if he loses everything, then he's going to curse you and die. But actually, when he loses everything, he really shows how honest he is in saying that God is wrong about all of this stuff. And so at the very end, when God says to the friends, you did not speak nachonah about me, I agree with, I follow Ed Greenstein on this, that Job's friends did not speak true about God rather than truth. That Job did speak true about God. Maybe Job didn't say truth. Everything Job says was right. But everything that Job said was definitely honest. So to me, a lot of people try to figure out, the nature of suffering, and that's definitely a big part of the book of Job. Is why do righteous people suffer? And it really seems like sometimes it's so random why righteous people
Hmm.
suffer. In the book of Job, anyway, there's a lot of randomness involved. The Satan just comes by on a whim, and Job loses everything. But what we learn from the book of Job is that you should always speak honestly. That if you're angry at God, it's okay. Let's hash it out. And it seems like there's a rich tradition of this in the Bible. Abraham arguing with God, disagreeing with God, Moses going face to face with God. And Job is really, and even after the Bible, there's a lot of traditions, especially Jewish traditions, of people arguing with God and debating with God and really trying to wrestle with God. And the book of Job really seems to be right in line with this tradition, that it's important to be honest with God more than it is to be um, more than it is to just try to flatter God, more than just trying to please God all the time.
Final question. Do you think Solomon rivaled Job, possibly? Because Solomon is referred to as the wisest king in the world. But with Job's hardcore righteousness, do you think these two people, do you think their popularities rival one another?
Wow, that's a really fun comparison, actually.
Hmm.
Solomon, yeah, so famous for his wisdom. And then, kind of toward after a little while, the rug kind of gets pulled out from Solomon a little bit, and he kind of may, and he's not always seen as the best king of all time as we expect him to be from the beginning. And then Job, kind of a reverse almost, where Job is super righteous, and then the rug gets pulled out from under him, and all of a sudden he's just talking trash against God so much. Um, so it's a really fun comparison. They're almost reversals in a way. That Solomon is so full of wisdom and knowledge about the world, and Job is so righteous. And then all of a sudden, Job kind of flips and is so just talking trash so much. The whole book is a bunch of trash talk from Job. So that's a really fun comparison. And in some ways, I do see. I don't see, and I don't think that the book of Job is trying necessarily to. Actually, maybe in some ways there is like an explicit rivalry against Solomon, in a sense, in that the book of Proverbs is kind of the book of Proverbs is presented as wise sayings of Solomon, and it's kind of like, if you do these things, then these things will happen. And there are a lot of proverbs that say things like, if you're righteous, then you protect your kids, things like that. And the book of Job really does not agree with that at all. That or I shouldn't say the book of Job doesn't agree with that. The book of Job doesn't like people who take it as a promise. Like some people read I think Job's friends, they read the book of Proverbs and they take everything as a promise. If you do this, then this will happen. If you're righteous, then your kids won't die. If you are a fool, then you will suffer. If you are smart, if you're wise, then you'll have a great life, Like these are kind of general proverbs, general wise sayings in the book of Proverbs. They're not meant to be taken as a one-to-one correspondence to reality. And so in the book of Job, Job's friends, they really almost take these as promises. And for Job, he looks at these things and he's like, well, it didn't happen for me. I'm the most righteous person on the planet. My kids did suffer. My kids did die. And the book of Job, it's wisdom literature, tons of wisdom throughout, but it kind of makes fun of people who take wise sayings too seriously. They take it too far.
Mm.
So in some ways, I think you could see it as a rival to Solomon in that sense. But I never thought about the fact that Solomon is the most wisest person on the planet, and Job is the most righteous person on the planet, and they're also opposed in that sense. That let's see if who wins, the wisdom or the righteousness, and they both fall apart, right? Neither one protects you from God. Like, you could be the wisest person on the planet, you're the most righteous, and you're not safe. Like, suffering can happen to anyone, no matter who you are. And so in that sense, it seems like there is kind of a fun comparison with Solomon and Job. I really like that you brought that up. Actually, that's a really fun comparison, because there's so many directions you can take that with the Proverbs versus Job. The friends are following Solomon, you could say, that all this wisdom that Solomon has, and the friends are just taking it, and okay, so then this should happen. If you're doing this, then that should happen. And Job is just like, none of it's happening. Like, I did it as much as I could, and none of it's happening. So that's a really fun comparison, actually. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I can wait.
Yeah, I was just going to ramble on for another minute about my dissertation, if I could.
Sure.
So I think that one thing that is really that's really huge to think about is Job's conversation with God. And this is something that part of it is heightened by the mediation in the book of Job. At the very beginning of the book, Job is mediating for his children. He's making these sacrifices just in case they sin in their hearts. And at the end of the book, Job is mediating for his friends. He's praying for his friends and making sure that, God doesn't punish them. And then in Job's speeches, Job calls out for a mediator, especially a judge, someone that can stand up and say, and listen to the trial and say, God, you're wrong, and Job, you're right. And he wants this judge to be, in chapter 9, he describes this judge pretty explicitly. And he really says, I want this judge to be almost like a bodyguard, because Job wants to speak directly to God. Job wants face-to-face interaction with God. Like, Job is tired of living in confusion. Job's tired of living in the dark. And he sees all this suffering, and he doesn't know how to stop it or how to prevent it, and where it's coming from and why it's coming at him. And is he being punished? And if so, what did he do? Like, whatever he did, it couldn't be this bad. And he's so confused. He has so many questions, and he really just wants to hash everything out with God. And he wants to have this face-to-face debate with God and explain to God, look, give me the list of accusations. You say I did this, 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 and this, and I will show you that this is wrong, that I didn't do it, that I am super righteous. And he really needs a bodyguard there, because he's terrified of God. God is scary. That God would do this, that God would punish him like this, just shows how scary God is. And not only that, but God has total monopoly on power and on wisdom. And God has all this wisdom. God's running the universe. God's, can do whatever God wants. And who are we to go up against God? And so for Job, he sees God as a legal rival, like a legal opponent. And he's, whatever it is, it's a court case, or God has punished him wrongly, and he wants to challenge the ruling on it. And so he uses all of these legal metaphors. And the whole time that he's talking about a direct conversation with God, his friends are really uncomfortable about that. And then all of a sudden, out of the whirlwind, God comes and talks to Job. They have a face-to-face conversation. And scholars always talk about how God never addresses any of Job's questions. God never answers anything that Job asks. Instead, God's like, look, I'm up here running the universe. You think I got time to worry about you? And so that's really all that God gives him. But the fact that God came out and talked to Job really is a huge part of the story, that Job does get this face-to-face interaction with God. And part of it is because Job is written so late. That Job is written in the Persian period, and a lot of Persian period texts don't have a lot of face time with God. That's more of a Genesis thing. The early books, there's Abraham and Moses and all these people are Jacob, all these people are talking to God face to face and having all these face to face conversations with God. But in the book of Esther, the word God doesn't even show up. In Ezra and Nehemiah, there's very few, God hardly shows up. There's not a lot of like FaceTime with God in any of these. In the prophetic books, God speaks through mediators, through prophets, but this kind of unmediated face-to-face conversation with God, that's not really something that you see in a lot of later biblical books as much. And so for Job, he starts asking for this. Job starts off kind of like that. God, there's no interaction between God and humans anywhere in the opening of the book of Job. And then we get something that's really unique in the Bible, which is a behind the scenes look at the heavens and God and what happens in the heavens between God and Satan. But still no interaction with humans, no direct interaction. The humans are clueless. They have no idea what God's doing. They can't talk about it. They can't hash it out. They can't argue with God about it. Eliphaz in chapter 7, he mentions a little vision that he got from God, but it almost seems a little bit silly. He says, that what are mortals that God would think about little old us? It's not like a big direct revelation that's really going to help Job's situation. But the fact that God comes out of the whirlwind and talks directly to Job, that's not the conversation that Job wanted to have. Job wanted to have a legal dispute in front of a judge. And he didn't get that. He didn't get a mediator that was going to stand there and protect him from God. And God is a little scary when God comes out. But at the same time, Job does get to see God. Job does get this face-to-face interaction with God. And then God says, Job is the one that spoke true about me, and blesses Job and not the friends. And the only thing God says to the friends is, you got to get Job to talk to me for you, because I'm not listening to you guys anymore. So that the fact that Job gets a face-to-face conversation with God is really important without a mediator, just the two of them. And interpreters throughout history have compared it to Moses a lot, that Moses and Job are the two that really talk to God face-to-face, almost as a friend. And some of them say that Job is even greater than Moses, because Job argued with God more than Moses did, that Job was even more honest. It seems like interpreters, especially the medieval rabbis, they see so much honesty in Job's conversation with God, that Job isn't really, mincing words with God. It shows that Job is really a kind of a person who is honestly righteous with God at the beginning. So at the end, when Job is blessed for speaking honestly, there seems to be a kind of honesty in return, that God comes and speaks to Job as well and gives Job a little bit of what he was asking for. Job asked, why am I being punished? And that's something that God can't answer, because Job is not being punished. And God answers by asking Job a question that Job can't answer. Where were you when I created the foundation of the world? Job was nowhere when God created the foundation. So neither one of them can answer those questions. But they did have this face-to-face. And John Chrysostom in the 2nd century, I love this quote. Talk about this quote a lot, actually. John Chrysostom, in one of his sermons on Job, he says that it feels like God is scooting up the divine throne and kind of leaning out of the heavens to have this conversation with Job, almost like Santa Claus or something like that. That they're so intimate there, that the two of them really understand each other, which is really interesting, because if you read the book really cursory, it feels kind of like God is talking past Job, not listening to anything. And, Job is so quiet towards the end. But the fact that they get this conversation and that Job has been asking for this conversation the entire book, and that the book is about honesty. This kind of face-to-face conversation without mediation, without a prophet, or without, somebody else kind of going in between, that kind of face-to-face conversation, it intensifies so much about the level of honesty between Job and God, that those two have a very honest relationship with each other.
Well, thanks for joining me today, Dr. Ryan Armstrong.
Thank you so much, Jacob. One other thing that's really fun, there's a play that was inspired by Job called JB, and I've been here talking to JB all day.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Jacob. I really appreciate it. It's really, really great meeting you, and you have a great channel. Appreciate the way that you just built it up from your bedroom. You love history, and you get so many amazing guests. I'm honored to be one of your guests.
Well, thank you for joining me once again.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, and if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.